Welcome to this video on private jurisdiction and family self-governance. We will discuss how trusts, private contracts, faith-based organizations, and private membership associations can lawfully protect your individual rights. We begin by considering Agenda 2030, the United Nations' bold plan to save the planet. But, depending on your perspective, this United Nations plan is either the most altruistic vision ever imagined or the most draconian blueprint for global control. Agenda 2030 is built around the United Nations' 17 Sustainable Development Goals, addressing everything from poverty and hunger to climate action and strong institutions. On the bright side, Agenda 2030 aims to end poverty, fight inequality, protect the environment, and ensure peace and prosperity for all. Think clean energy, fair education, food security, and a safer, greener future. However, critics warn that the pursuit of these goals could lead to massive government control, surveillance, restricted freedoms, and top-down mandates that decide how you live, eat, and work. So, is Agenda 2030 a global act of compassion or a worldwide power grab? The answer depends on whether you view it as humanity's greatest collaboration or centralization gone too far. One thing is certain, Agenda 2030 will shape your future. The real question we must ask is, who gets to decide what that future looks like? How do you ensure that you are the one who decides your future? We believe the path lies in understanding and utilizing private jurisdiction as a pathway to freedom. Private jurisdiction is a growing movement for lawful self-governance. It is seen by some as a revolutionary return to personal freedom, and by others as a risky challenge to the modern state. The current landscape is characterized by increasing government regulation and overreach, leading to the gradual erosion of individual freedom. Looking at the current landscape, we see a steady expansion of laws, centralized authority, and growing restrictions since 1900. This landscape includes expanding statutory laws and administrative regulations. Governments now issue tens of thousands of new regulations annually, covering everything from business licensing to personal conduct. Administrative agencies often create rules with the force of law, bypassing direct legislative oversight. For example, small business owners facing excessive compliance costs for minor infractions. Complexity creates dependency on government approval and legal experts. We also see a shift from individual sovereignty to centralized authority. Historically, communities and individuals held more autonomy over governance and dispute resolution. Today, centralized national and supranational bodies make decisions affecting local affairs. For example, global health mandates and international trade agreements overriding local customs and preferences. Power is concentrated, leaving individuals with fewer direct channels for influence. Finally, there are growing restrictions on personal, economic, and spiritual liberties. The scope of government, permission extends into areas once considered private or sacred. For example, faith-based organizations facing government intervention in membership policies, and restrictions on the use of cash or limitations on small-scale trade without permits. This leads us from a state of liberty to a system of permission-based living. Defining the problem shows the contrast between natural rights governance leading to individual sovereignty versus a state-controlled permission system leading to dependency. Natural rights, life, freedom, and property, are inherent, not given by government. However, they are increasingly reframed as privileges that require permits, licenses, or government approval. For example, needing a permit to collect rainwater, or licenses to conduct otherwise harmless trade. If a right is granted by the state, it can be limited or revoked at will. Contracts and agreements often default to public law jurisdiction. Many standard contracts automatically place disputes under statutory or administrative courts. For example, bank account agreements binding customers to jurisdiction under federal banking laws, regardless of the customer's private status. Even private arrangements may be interpreted through public law unless explicitly structured otherwise. Without deliberate structuring, individuals lose the option to resolve disputes under private law. Dependency on government systems erodes community autonomy. Over-reliance on centralized services, healthcare, education, dispute resolution reduces local problem-solving capacity. For example, communities waiting for government disaster relief instead of activating mutual aid networks. Or local businesses sidelined by procurement rules favoring large, regulated suppliers. Skills, resilience, and decision-making drift away from the community to distant bureaucracies. We will now explore the lawful basis for self-governance and how we can reclaim our individual freedoms. The legal foundations for private jurisdiction already exist. These frameworks affirm the right to self-govern outside of public jurisdiction. Private trust law operates under equity and contract law rather than statutory corporate frameworks, offering confidentiality, asset protection, and governance outside public commercial law. For example, a family trust managing property outside of corporate registration requirements. Private contract law, used by PMAs and formed under the right to contract, allows members to agree on rules and activities outside of public regulation, rooted in the right to association. For example, a health practitioner's PMA offering holistic services to members without falling under public health regulations. Activities are private and consensual, not open to the public. Natural law and God's law position governance within universal, timeless principles rather than shifting politics, affirming the right to self-determination and conscience. For example, the right to self-determination and conscience, recognized regardless of government recognition. This positions governance within universal, timeless principles rather than shifting politics. Ecclesiastical law for ministries allows churches and ministries to operate autonomously with internal governance, protecting their spiritual mission from secular interference. For example, church-run schools operating under the oversight of the ministry rather than the state. The Montevideo Convention, which defines statehood as having a permanent population, defined territory, a government and capacity for relations, supports the underlying concept of self-governing entities, a recognized principle in international law. While aimed at nations, the principles support the concept of self-governing entities. For example, indigenous nations referencing Montevideo criteria in sovereignty claims. The law of nations provides moral and legal precedent for autonomous governance structures, recognizing the right of self-government between independent communities. For example, early American founders referencing law of nations in the Federalist Papers. This provides moral and legal precedent for autonomous governance structures. It predates much of modern statutory law. Operating through private trust law is a time-tested way to safeguard property, wealth, and privacy. Private trusts create legal separation between the trustee, beneficiary, and assets, shielding property and wealth from public claims. This legal separation means no single party has complete ownership, reducing exposure to certain public claims. The trust is a legal container distinct from its members. For example, a family places real estate into a trust, with a professional trustee managing it, and children as beneficiaries, protecting it from individual liabilities. Private trusts often operate outside public commercial law, relying on contract and equity jurisdiction, thus protecting assets from personal liabilities. For example, a small business owner places operational assets in a private trust, insulating them from personal legal disputes. Proper drafting and adherence to lawful operation are critical for maintaining protection. Trust deeds allow for customizable governance, enabling a private rulebook tailored to the creator's intent and values, avoiding statutory corporate models. For example, a faith-based trust requiring that investments align with religious values and that leadership decisions follow ecclesiastical protocols. This avoids the one-size-fits-all statutory corporate governance model, enabling a private rulebook. Freedom of association is a powerful shield, allowing communities to operate through private membership associations. Private membership associations are protected under constitutional and international principles, allowing them to operate in a lawful private space. PMAs are rooted in the right to freely associate, affirming the ability of individuals to form communities outside direct state interference. For example, a holistic health group forms a PMA to serve members without falling under certain public health regulations, relying on the principle of voluntary private association. These protections exist so individuals can form communities outside direct state interference, as long as they don't violate other parties' rights. Private membership agreements define the relationship as private and contractual, acting as the, quote, private jurisdiction boundary for members. For example, a cooperative farming PMA, where members agree on pesticide use, pricing, and dispute resolution internally, not through public courts unless voluntarily submitted. Since PMAs operate privately, they are not subject to many public regulations designed for public commerce, offering flexibility, innovation, and value sharing for their members. For example, a faith-based counseling PMA may not be bound by state licensing rules that apply to public practitioners, as services are strictly for members. This avoids the constraints of one-size-fits-all public regulatory systems.